Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine having to manage someone whose performance is literally harming your team's outcomes, but they are completely legally unfireable. Wild, right? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a hidden crisis in education. It's one that affects classrooms everywhere, but is perfectly illustrated by a fascinating deep dive study into the Turkish education system. We're going to solve the mystery of the marginal teacher.
Right off the bat, let me hit you with a statistic from the source data that is honestly just shocking. Recent research looking at OECD data found that up to 60% of teachers in the Turkish system show low instructional competence. I mean, let that sink in for a second. 60%. And a huge chunk of these folks are categorized as just indifferent. We're not talking about teachers who don't know their subject matter. No, we're talking about teachers who are completely disengaged, lacking really basic stuff like student cognitive activation and direct instruction.
So this brings us to the core problem the article is trying to solve. How on earth do you manage a teacher you literally can't fire? In highly centralized, super rigid education systems like Turkey's, permanent teachers enjoy incredibly strong job security. Think about it from a school leader's perspective. You're the one responsible for student success, right? But you're stuck navigating this system where underperforming teachers are practically immune to getting dismissed. It is a leadership puzzle of the absolute highest order.
Part 1. Defining the marginal teacher.
To figure this out, the researchers used a really solid qualitative methodology. They didn't just stare at spreadsheets. Instead, they sat down for in-depth, face-to-face interviews with 18 different school principals across elementary, middle, and high schools in southern Turkey. This is great because it grounds our whole explainer today in the actual lived daily experiences of the school leaders who are fighting this battle on the front lines.
And through these interviews, a really clear picture starts to emerge. Drawing on foundational literature, the researchers define the marginal teacher as a fence rider. Honestly, that phrase hits the nail on the head. These teachers hover right on the borderline of inadequacy. It's not that they're completely ineffective. Actually, when an inspector or a principal walks into the room, they magically elevate their performance just enough to hit that average level and pass their evaluations. But the very second that observation is over, boom, they revert right back to chronically poor practices. And ultimately, that lack of sustained effort is what really harms student learning.
Now, it's absolutely crucial we make a distinction here. You might be sitting there thinking, well, aren't they just incompetent? Not exactly. Actually, scratch that. It's completely different. An incompetent teacher completely lacks capacity. They just don't have the skills, they fail the evaluations, and they don't really improve even if you give them a ton of support. The marginal teacher, on the other hand, they actually have the capacity. They know the subject matter. What they lack is the motivation, the right attitude, and the effort. They are choosing to perform at this absolute bare minimum borderline level.
So what does this actually look like in a real classroom? Well, the study identified some very specific defining behaviors. First up is instructional disengagement. We're talking about totally inadequate lesson prep, incredibly monotonous lessons, or literally just sitting there staring at a mobile phone while the kids are in class. Then you have organizational withdrawal. Principals noted these teachers will deliberately avoid extra work, or they'll just suddenly take sick leave to get out of guard duty. Some even form little cliques that drag down the whole school's vibe. And maybe worst of all, they show this fierce resistance to professional growth. They get super defensive if you criticize them, and they flat out refuse to step outside their comfort zones.
Moving on to Part 2, the systemic roadblocks.
Okay, so under Civil Servants Law number 657 in Turkey, permanent teachers have an ironclad, basically unbreakable level of job security. This legal framework, combined with all the disciplinary regulations, completely strips principals of the formal authority they need to enforce accountability. What this means in plain English is that low performance almost never faces any direct consequences or real sanctions. So the principals are in a massive bind here. Because policy shifts have re-centralized formal supervision, it's the external inspectors who hold all the real evaluative power, not the principals themselves. Imagine being a principal. You have to deal with these marginal teachers who are heavily resistant to change, they're comfortably passive, and they are fully aware that you, their boss, have virtually zero formal power to discipline them. It's a tough spot. Which brings us to a huge aha moment and the really central question of our explainer today. Without formal authority, without the power to fire or even sanction someone, what can a principal actually do to protect their students? That takes us to Part 3. How school leaders cope. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire ecosystem of the problem. What we're looking at is a thematic framework that maps out the marginal teacher, starting from the definition, flowing down through all those challenges we just talked about, and finally branching out into the response strategies. Basically, since the formal legal systems are incredibly slow and often just don't work, principals have to lean heavily into informal individual efforts and targeted professional development to actually get anything to change.
This all builds into a really practical 3-step workaround. Step 1 is informal communication. Principals rely heavily on relationship-based management. They use a values-based approach. Put simply, they just talk to the teacher human to human. Step 2 is psychological support. Principals recognize that marginality sometimes stems from severe burnout or a personal crisis. So they provide guidance to try and rebuild that teacher's self-efficacy. They might create small tasks where the teacher can experience a quick win and feel a sense of success. And then there's step 3, which is targeted professional development.
So what kind of development are we talking about? The principals in the study detailed some very specific strategies here. They use personalized in-service training, completely ditching the one-size-fits-all approach. They use mentoring, like literally pairing a marginal teacher up with a highly effective one. They also build collaborative peer groups and school-based plans. Remember, because a marginal teacher actually has the underlying capacity, the entire goal of these strategies is to tap into that dormant potential. They are trying to rebuild the teacher's belief that they can, for sure, still make a real difference in the classroom.
Finally, Section 4, the future of education.
Let's zoom out to the macro level for a second. Why does a localized study of 18 principals in southern Turkey matter to the rest of us? Well, because this tension, the tension between job security and teacher performance, is a totally universal challenge. It dictates the global future of educational leadership. The absolute main takeaways you should have from this explainer is that effectively identifying and intervening with marginal teachers is not just about administrative compliance. It is 100% about protecting students. When 60% of an educational workforce shows low instructional competence, the long-term, sometimes irreversible consequences fall directly on the kids. Rebuilding accountability, even if it's informal accountability driven by strong local leadership, is absolutely essential for advancing school success, no matter where you are in the world.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. Job security for teachers is incredibly important, right? It protects educators from political whims, unfair dismissals, you name it. But as we've clearly seen today, it can also create this safe harbor for the fence riders. So how do we, as a society, balance the essential need for teacher job security with the absolute non-negotiable right of students to receive a high-quality education? It is a massive policy tightrope, but I really hope this breakdown gave you a much clearer view of the intense challenges our school leaders are navigating every single day. If you found this explainer valuable and you want more focused, structured learning straight from the source material, hit that like button right now and make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more fascinating deep dives coming your way. Thanks so much for learning with me today.